Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today titled Next Normal Connectivity, Networks, and Cybersecurity. My name is Alex Chetia, and I'll be leading our session together with my guest, Mr. David DeWalt, CEO and founder of Night Dragon Security. I'd also like to introduce my colleague, Will Barkis, who is a principal here at Orange Silicon Valley. He will be helping with your questions throughout the presentation. Please see the right-hand side of your screen for submitting questions or for chatting with the other participants. Before we get started, I'd like to set the scene. Our session today is part of a 20-webinar series called Business Resilience in All Times that Orange is organizing to provide information and thought leadership to support business leaders throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Today's session is a look into the domain of connectivity, networks, and cybersecurity in the next normal. Our goal is to provide a Silicon Valley perspective on the major societal changes we expect to see in the digitally accelerated world after the pandemic. Orange Silicon Valley has been participating in the Silicon Valley ecosystem for 20 years through investment in strategy and technology innovation with a team of 45 subject matter experts focusing on 17 areas of technology innovation. Today's topic is connectivity, networks, and cybersecurity. In this session, we will explore how the current global pandemic is accelerating the rate of innovation in connectivity and cybersecurity, and how the network operators have adapted at the height of the pandemic. As already mentioned, my name is Alex Chetia, and I lead the cybersecurity practice at Orange Silicon Valley. Joining me today is Mr. David DeWalt. David is a current CEO and founder of Night Dragon Security and has an impressive background as a cybersecurity executive, having been the CEO of McAfee and FireEye. Today, he will provide insights on how the COVID-19 pandemic affected the cybersecurity environment, as well as what the future holds for the industry in a post-pandemic world. He will also explore the role the cybersecurity industry has in supporting the safe operations of enterprises, as well as guarding the digital lives of consumers during this pandemic. We will look at all of this through the lens of the industry moving forward into the post-pandemic next normal. I'd now like to take a moment and share a roadmap for our discussion, which will last for about 45 minutes. I'll start with a 10-minute overview of the impact the COVID-19 pandemic had on connectivity, networks, and cybersecurity. I'll then hand it over to David for a 20-minute presentation on what lies ahead for the cybersecurity industry in a post-pandemic next normal environment. And we will conclude with a 15-minute discussion and Q&A. We have a lot to cover, so let's burn this candle. 2020 started off strong, with the world more connected than it has ever been in its history. At the beginning of the year, the US telecom landscape was focused on a few key areas as follows. 5G, all of the US operators were actively working on rolling out their 5G technologies, be it a fixed wireless access product or 5G mobile services. Media, AT&T was focused on launching its new streaming service, HBO Max, built around content acquired through its takeover of Time Warner. Verizon was focusing on its high-profile partnerships with the likes of Disney+, Apple Music, Snap, and many others. But the highlight of the year was the T-Mobile and Sprint were in active M&A talks, and after a nearly 2-year saga, T-Mobile eventually closed its acquisition of Sprint on April 1st. As the COVID-19 epidemic became a pandemic in late February, beginning of March, everything changed. At that time, the unprecedented shelter-in-place policies enacted worldwide have only reinforced the importance of connectivity, networks, and cybersecurity in our lives. Millions of employees and companies moved their activities online overnight, which in turn made secure connections and networks crucial to the survival of economies around the world. As people sheltered in place, the massive migration online has been increasing the demands on networks significantly. Service providers have been under pressure to deliver seamless connectivity to the millions at home, working, going to school, or simply seeking entertainment online. In this new context, the networks have seen unprecedented stress. For example, the total traffic on AT&T's core networks has jumped by 25% from before the COVID-19 outbreak. AT&T's mobile network usage for a number of applications has also increased, including instant messaging up by 60%, gaming up by 50%, and voice calls up by 33%. Furthermore, social media and digital entertainment consumption also grew exponentially. US operators and large tech platforms have shown remarkable resilience during the pandemic. While there haven't been any large-scale outages to date, operators and tech platforms had to quickly adapt to new patterns of digital usage, as well as new cybersecurity threats. Overall, they were able to weather the surge in demand and accommodate for the new patterns. That is because networks are usually designed to handle peaks and are built ahead of forecast demand. Also, in addition, when the pandemic started, Verizon and most of the other US operators initiated the process of temporarily borrowing spectrum for any anticipated traffic spikes in case of urgent need. Prior to the pandemic, the move towards software-controlled network function virtualization was already sweeping the industry. This technology allows operators to adapt quickly to enable more services to keep up with demand. As an example, as video conferencing is increasing at significant rates, carriers could offer targeted plans that can offer better quality of service for these applications through prioritization. The pandemic will only accelerate this transition, which will be boosted by edge computing and the broader deployment of 5G. Verizon, for example, already announced it will increase spending on its network by $500 million to support its network and 5G expansion. Cybersecurity was an important topic before the COVID-19 pandemic and continues to be top of mind in the current environment. As the majority of the workforce transitioned to working remotely on unsecured home networks, security has become an even more critical issue. For example, in 2019, we had more than 7,000 breaches worldwide reported. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, Barracuda Networks reported that phishing emails increased by 600%, while Google reported more than 100 million daily phishing emails with a COVID-19 theme. As the coronavirus spread worldwide, cybercriminals tried to capitalize on the global health crisis by deploying attacks with a COVID-19 theme. Cybersecurity researchers believe this trend was likely to persist and escalate in various forms. As of July 2020, we have seen the Twitter accounts of major companies and individuals compromised in one of the most widespread and confounding breaches the platform has ever seen. As more online activity has moved to unsecured home networks, the attack surface expanded. We have therefore seen targeted attacks against medical organizations involved in researching, treating, or responding to the pandemic. One example close to home for us here in Silicon Valley was the ransomware attack against the University of California at San Francisco. As more people were from home using poorly designed and implemented remote access solutions, attacks against remote technologies like VPN gateways and poorly secured home and shared Wi-Fi access points will increase. During this time, as more and more computing activity also moves to the cloud, security programs are forced to consider local and cloud infrastructure in their strategy. And lastly, as most businesses are accelerating their move to the cloud and specifically online commerce, they might accumulate security debt, as security is sometimes sacrificed in favor of speed to market. According to a white paper authored by our colleagues at Orange Cyber Defense, the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the security threat models in 5 significant ways. First, employees are more vulnerable to social engineering and scams than normal. Second, companies have less control and visibility than usual over the IT systems. Third, users may be connected from systems and environments that are fundamentally insecure or poorly configured. Fourth, companies may have rushed to implement remote access systems without having the time to properly plan and execute, thus accumulating that security debt. And fifth, companies and their vendors may actually be operating with diminished capacity. However, companies do adapt, they're adapting in innovative ways and are implementing all and a subset of the following things. They establish visibility of their digital footprint to know which assets are open to attack. They're minimizing their attack surface by fixing misconfigured devices, patching, and removing obsolete assets. They try to mitigate the risk of insider threat. They try to protect high-risk individuals like CEOs and offer them in-depth training. And they continue education programs like phishing education programs. However, private companies need to work together with governments and other public agencies in order to effect meaningful change at an industry level. Healthcare, together with the financial industry, is one of the most attacked industries due to the high value of its data. The COVID-19 pandemic has only made the situation worse. Political figures like US Senator Mark Warner have long argued that meaningful cybersecurity policies need to be put in place in order to better protect health data. I'd now like to introduce my guest for today, Mr. David DeWalt. David is a veteran CEO, advisor, and investor. He has a track record of more than 15 years as president and CEO of 3 major companies, McAfee, FireEye, and Mandiant. Today, David serves as the CEO and founder of Night Dragon Security, a dedicated cybersecurity and investment advisory firm. In addition, he is a managing director in Allegis Cyber and Momentum Cyber, as well as an investor and board member in some of the world's most innovative companies, such as Delta Airlines, Team8, and many others. Without further ado, David DeWalt.
Or good afternoon, good evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. Alex, thank you so much for the introduction. I hope everybody's being safe right now and healthy. It's to say it's a crazy world would be an understatement. If you're living in the United States, I feel like we have this in almost apocalyptic situation going on. California has the wildfires right now, the pandemics, the economic crisis, the cultural crisis, the government crisis. Wow, what an amazing world we're living in. I want to try to talk to you a little bit about what this sort of incredibly crazy environment has done to the world of cybersecurity. And I think it's important because, as I think the team from Orange has said, you know, we sort of had the new normal and then the next normal and then the next normal. And after a while, you wonder if there is anything normal. And one thing that's been true throughout this process is the need for cyber and safety and security has never been greater. And it's obvious that we're living in a very unique world now as we go forward. So let me take a step back for a second. For a guy who's been in the industry for, you know, a long time, I was obviously a CEO for 17 years, many different companies. I always say 68 quarters. It's like dog years being a CEO of public companies. And I've been through the cybersecurity markets almost from its inception. As Alex mentioned, I was CEO of McAfee for a number of years, CEO for FireEye and Mandiant. I also serve on the National Security Telecommunication Council for the President. I've been on the council with both the Obama administration and Trump administration for now almost 10 years. I serve as chairman of safety and security on the board of directors of Delta Airlines. I'm the vice chairman of Optiv as well. So I work with one of the largest North American VARs. I chair 14 different cybersecurity companies. I have over 40 different investments into the cyberspace. And if you can't tell, I love this market and the mission around it and the opportunity that's here. It's incredible to watch it grow. So, you know, one of the first things I do is step back and I talk about what I've talked about for 20 years, ironically. And I put it up here every time because it's just getting exacerbated with all the crisis we're having. And I call it the perfect storm, the perfect cyber storm. But think about what's going on. We have this incredible speed of innovation that's occurring in the world, right? Technology is amazing. We live in this century now where innovation is happening on a basis that we've never seen before. But what does that do? It drives vulnerabilities everywhere, right? Everybody in capitalism has created this environment where we race to get to market with the next greatest thing, whether it's a device or an IoT thing or a cloud or mobile or social networks or satellites or drones. And we end up just creating, you know, a new attack surface that's vulnerable. And who hardens their security before they release a product? Hardly anybody. So all this innovation has created this expansive attack surface that has really created an unbelievable opportunity if you're an attacker. And what have we watched? The attacker groups explode. We now track over 1,000 different attacker groups in the world. There's more than 100 nations in the world now that have offensive cyber commands, and it's growing. If you have a military organization in a country, you almost have to have a cyber operation as well, both offensive and defensive. So when I first started in this market, it was kind of the big five. And now we have 100 nations, and more defense spending from a military point of view is going into a cyber point of view. It's obvious, and it's just constantly happening. What's that created? You know, everything from hacktivism to crime to, you know, all kinds of espionage scenarios, terrorism and warfare. As you think about what's going on, when I was first CEO of McAfee, the biggest things we used to worry about was worms and Trojans and viruses spreading on computers that were really a nuisance or kind of like activism that was occurring. It didn't really steal anything necessarily, but it just created opportunities for people to become noticed. I don't know if you remember like a Love You virus and Code Red viruses and all these. And we were tracking tens of millions of these during my early days. And now we're watching unbelievable exploits occurring, obviously. Compound that with all the geopolitical tensions. It's incredible, right? I've never seen the geopolitical tensions quite like they are. Of course, I look through an American lens, but I mean, I call it a cyber sandwich here in America, right? We have the Chinese on one side, the Russians on another side, one trying to influence one Republican sort of candidate, another trying to influence another Democratic candidate. The disinformation, influence operations, information warfare is at an unbelievable height. We have no integrity on our internet. The ability to create false media, false news, and really create an atmosphere of disillusionment is easy with all the environments that we now have. And governments are really finding that easy to do, and they can be anonymous. They can obviously obfuscate their attacks. They act like, known groups, and all they have to do is have a piece of information that they can spread. And I can talk a lot more about that. And of course, how many people are being arrested around these things? Almost nobody. And it's incredible to watch what's going on. And the legacy security providers just have a hard time keeping up. And what did we watch? The business, when I first got into this, was measured in a couple $1 billion, now into hundreds of billions of dollars. So take a look at this slide. It's a really important slide, and I know it's a little cluttered. Every time we watched an elevated threat landscape, what happened? Over the last 20 years, we had a super cycle of growth in the cybersecurity industry. And threat cycles drive super growth. And as we come into 2020 with this incredibly elevated threat landscape, probably the highest single threat landscape I've seen in the history of the cyber domain, we are going to see another explosion in this domain without a doubt. And we're already seeing it. And so each time that's happened, from quantity-based attacks to quality-based attacks, from IP warfare to information warfare, we've watched accelerations of this market just jump almost exponentially. And if you sort of look at what's going down now with all these breaches, now measured in the thousands of just reported breaches, we're looking at a scenario where we're going to see $1 trillion of spending in cyber over the next 4 years, but in the same period of time, which is incredible, the estimates will be a $6 trillion loss. So again, in a somewhat asymmetric environment, we're seeing the amount of spending exploding, but we're seeing the same thing occurring with losses. And that's what's really interesting in this market today, is we end up with an incredibly interesting world. And sorry, that was my coffee machine going on if you heard that, so my apologies. One of the work from home perils is things that go on. Anyway, what's interesting again is these breaches, the ability to breach, the loss scenario is greater than we've ever seen before. What has that created? This cybersecurity market that's literally unprecedented. It's hard to believe. I mean, we watched over the last 12 months, 21 companies raise capital, over 100 million in a single capital raise. We watched a record year for M&A activity at $27 billion of M&A activity. We watched some of the highest market capitalizations of security companies in history, well, easily in history. My prediction, we'll see the first $100 billion cyber company in the next 3 years. 3 years. One man's view, but it's coming. We're now seeing market caps over 25 billion. We're going to see that grow. And I predict we're going to see something over $100 billion. And of course, this is just inertia going on with the amount of investments happening, the size of the companies, the markets that are growing. And this thing just continues to expand in ways that we can't believe. And almost every large company is now trying to figure out how to get a piece of the cyber market that is going on. Incredible information. And you look at what's the result of all of this. Over 3,500 cyber companies. I put this chart up for a reason. It's like an eye test. You can't even see it. And I couldn't even put 3,500 companies on one slide. But we now have over 55 categories, different categories of cyber, 3,500. And we have basically two ginormous areas of innovation. One is Israel, one is the United States. But if you start to look at what's happening around the world, almost every nation is beginning to produce cybersecurity companies. A lot of people don't know this, but one of my companies, I became CEO of FireEye. The origin of FireEye came from Pakistan. And what was interesting about Pakistan was the engineers in Pakistan had invented essentially a virtual machine or a sandbox, and was able to create something that could run at network speed. My point of this is almost every nation is creating innovation now that is incredibly interesting. And I'll show you some of the really interesting things during the COVID window that are being designed around the world. But here we have a massive market. It's very difficult to understand, and it's getting extraordinarily complex. And I'll show you a little bit more of why that actually is. I think it's obvious COVID's profoundly changed. Usually don't stop at COVID. In my opening there, I talked a lot about all of the crisis that is occurring around the world today, and particularly in America, even more so. But we're watching, not just the pandemic, the resulting economic crisis that's occurring, the resulting cultural crisis that's happening. And I'm sure most of you see Black Lives Matter, but all of the activity around that. You now see government crisis, Democrat, Republican battles in ways that we've never seen before. And we've ultimately now seen, what we're seeing is just massive climate crisis as well. Every time there's a piece of news about wildfires and air quality in California, over 500, sort of unique burning wildfires, what is happening behind it? Spear phishing campaigns, new DNS registrations, domain registrations, all trying to disseminate false information, trying to scare the public even more so than needs to be. And who is perpetrating that? Not coming from news medias in the United States, let's just say. A lot of this is coming from foreign nations trying to influence America, create fear and paranoia. It's really incredible to watch, not just the pandemic crisis create opportunity, but really the other crisis as well. And again, like I said, this is the highest single threat landscape, at least that I've ever seen. One of the comments that my partner at Night Dragon has said, I have Admiral Mike Rogers, former NSA director, head of US Cyber Command until last year. He made a pretty public comment talking about this is the greatest window to be an attacker in history. Greatest window. And when you sort of look at what Alex was alluding to with all the changes that are occurring in this pandemic sort of new normal environment, you've created a very, I hate to say easy, but probably really easy opportunity for any attacker who has any skills to do. So let's look at that for a second. What's happening? Obviously the threat landscape is elevated. And how is it elevated? So, Alex alluded to the fact that, employees are more vulnerable because where are they working at home, right? So I look at my home here and what do I have? A router that's provided by one of my telecommunications friends. And well, how secure is that router? Let me tell you, not very secure. You know how easy it is to put an implant in a router today? Very easy. Those attack kits exist anywhere. And all I have to do is commandeer that router and you own all network connectivity into that house. So where is the biggest surface we see from work from home? Routers. And what do we have to do? We have to figure out a way to harden that router in a much more secure way. There's a really cool company I work with called Seamless Networks in Israel. They protect routers with a software piece of technology with a multi-tenanted backend cloud. There's a few other companies doing it as well. Relatively simple service that managed service providers can do. And we can protect every single home through the router. But it doesn't just stop there. For example, you now have all these IoT devices connected at home. You have personal devices that you are connecting with that are sharing personal space with professional space. How do we segment and isolate those personal spaces from those sort of, private and professional spaces? Not so easy to do. And you start to look at the opportunity now for me to spear phish you at home. And Alex alluded to this. I mean, it's almost child's play. Why is that? Because it used to be the number one vector of attack was spear phishing through email. Well, that's changed. You know what the number one attack vector for spear phishing now is? These DM tools, social media tools. How much security do we happen to have on WhatsApp, on LinkedIn DMs? How much do you have on WeChat? What about TikTok? What about any major platform that you're DMing? How about this little live storm we're on right now? What about On24, Google Hangouts, any one of them? These vectors for me to share information, spear phish you, get a keylogger on your device, record your credentials, log in as you, piggyback off your VPN is not that hard. And so what are we watching? Massive infiltrations on spear phishing, massive infiltrations onto the routers themselves, and that's just the attack surface at home. When you start to look at the attack surface as people now do business in this environment, what are we seeing? The VPN is backhauling into the network. Everybody's trying to figure out, well, okay, everybody's now working from home. I now have 80,000 new IP addresses that are working at what hours of the day and night. And, it's not just a Monday through Friday thing anymore. It's a Saturday, Sunday, every day of the week at all kinds of hours. How do I build anomalous behavior detection such that I can now track that Dave DeWalt's connected from what state, what city, what IP address? And with now these obfuscation technologies that are out there that can help me obfuscate my IP address, and I don't know if some of you have seen some of these capabilities, but the attackers use these network abstraction tools that were once popular with a government offensive mission, almost Tor for your own private network. I can obfuscate all my IP addresses while attacking you. You don't even know where they've come from. In fact, I can obfuscate the cloud gateway in a way that the work from home users don't know where the IP address came from. And if you look at the history of security technologies, these legacy security providers, most of their products were trained to understand IP addresses and some things that were fixed as part of their anomalous behavioral models. So a lot of new normal, next normal, so to speak, when it comes from this work from home environment that requires training of these tools, especially if they're backhauling into the network and what they're doing. If you kind of look at what's happening with these emerging technologies, we're talking about a couple of really interesting areas. The first area I think about is the extended enterprise. So here on a chart for you is a graph of like a dartboard, and of all the technology that are gaining inertia as emerging technologies in this crisis window that we're in. And I can spend a lot of time on this, but I'll just cut it down to 2 or 3 areas. Think about number one is the extended enterprise for a second, the work from home. What are large enterprises doing to protect every employee at home? And how do you manage the security privacy balance of that? Like I said, the router and the IoT devices and the connectivity, we have to think about new models. One of the new models that's very powerful, most of you know, is SASE. These are the secure access service edge providers. And it's very powerful technology. I can now take my little mobile phone here. I have a piece of software. It routes all my protocol traffic to a backend SASE cloud. And I can have defense in depth through containers. I can spin up a container upon connection. I can terminate the container. I have a disposable network. I can put a container for a cloud gateway with a proxy. I can do a DLP container. I can do an anomalous behavioral container. And no longer do I have to backhaul through a network to do it. These technologies are very fast growing and very interesting. I'm sure you've seen Zscaler, has unprecedented growth. I think of them as, I hate to say, kind of Gen 1 of cloud gateways. There's newer vendors that are doing pure SASE container-based cloud gateways that require even, or can provide even more flexibility. One of them I love is a company called iBoss, which is a very interesting company who's built like a next generation SASE cloud gateway. But now I can have every user, no matter where I'm located, home or hiking or walking or the Starbucks or wherever I go, connect through a SASE backend cloud gateway. So you have to think about that extended enterprise in a way that isn't just the home anymore. It's everywhere that user may go. For example, for me, I love to go hiking. I love walking, and I do business calls while I'm walking. And how do I protect myself while sharing information or getting DMs of some sort while I'm hiking? I have to use some sort of SASE engine to backhaul myself into the network, or I have to use a SASE engine to basically connect straight to the gateway. So some really interesting new things occurring as we think about our work from home environment today. And then you start to think about ML. If you look at the middle of the dashboard there for a second, you can see it. Machine learning engines, AI engines are, the future here for sure. I mean, this new normal we're in is obviously going to require massive AI capabilities in order to really understand anomalous behavior that can be occurring. There's some amazing companies building what I think of as AI capabilities in a way that I think will be a platform for nearly every security vendor. And we're watching that high-speed ingestion, NGL-like technologies constantly evolving our ability to stay up with the attackers, who, by the way, are using AI the same way. And we have this race of AI that's creating, again, a dislocation between what the offense can do and what the defense can do. So obviously we're tracking a lot of these AI tools that are in the marketplace today that are enabling us to be able to be more secure in the ways that we're thinking about it. And we can talk a little bit more in the Q&A around that. The last slide I'll do here, and then I'll turn it over to Alex to do a little bit of Q&A for us. But one of the things I wanted to kind of show you is the way I'm thinking about the problem going forward. So we think about traditional cybersecurity, everybody kind of knows the markets, endpoints, networks, clouds. Well, a lot is changing, and it's changing very fast. I think about the terrestrial or land-based cyber market with all the things we've talked about. We talk about, now maybe the new endpoints are inclusive of IoT devices, OT devices, and being able to extend that beyond IT to all the other endpoints that are important. Of course, a lot of people have been very vulnerable to ransomware attacks in this COVID window because they haven't air gapped or thought they didn't air gap their networks. And suddenly they can take hostage over operational technology areas, industrial control technologies. We're seeing a lot of expansion there, tons of markets, application security layers. One of the biggest attacks that I saw recently was a vulnerability, a zero-day vulnerability in the SAP system. Some of you might have seen it a few weeks ago. It affected 40,000 customers around the world of SAP. I think it was discovered by a company called Onapsis. And this vulnerability enabled attackers to take control over the SAP system. And one of the ways in which they could take control of it is through RPAs and robotic process automation, which is all the rage for these SAP systems. And suddenly we now have RPAs communicating to SAP without authentication, certificates, logging, and the ability to essentially DDoS those applications or implant something into BAPI, ABAP interface layers of SAP, exposing massive data loss in those types of environments. So a lot is changing both on the land, but you elevate that one level and you start to go, what's happening during COVID? Well, this little thing called air and airborne protocols is beginning to be a very large market opportunity led by drones, right? In a lot of ways, in my Delta Airlines world, one of my biggest fears is drones, doing safety and security for the airline. A consumer can basically go to a local electronics store, buy a drone, and essentially fly it around our airport and cause us to have a massive delay until we can stop that. That's exactly what happened at Gatwick Airport last year, as well as a few other airports that weren't publicly announced. So how do we stop the defense above the building into the air? And what is a drone? A drone is essentially an endpoint. It's talking to a base station on an RF protocol. How do we begin to create sensors that essentially can analyze anomalous behavior in the air? And now with COVID, everything's going to be driven, not everything, but a lot of things will be, improved inertia for the drone economy, delivery of healthcare products, crisis in, some climate control environment. The amount of drones flying around Northern California right now with the fires is amazing because it's a great tool to do. But how do you police good ones from bad ones? What happens if a bad one occurs and you could load explosives onto a drone and fly it into a populous area? These are all things that have to get resolved in the next generation of cyberspace in a way that I'm very worried about what the offense can do and what the defense can do. And that's not to talk about espionage and terrorism, warfare that can occur here. If you then take it one more layer, you think about space. And I think everybody knows this, if you don't know, we had 1,536 satellites launch going into 2019. 1,536 launched satellites. We will launch over 9,000 satellites this year alone. So both LEO and NEO and GEO satellites at different orbiting levels of low Earth and near Earth are enabling critical infrastructure to talk to satellites. So now my car, my watch, my IoT device talks over the top directly to a satellite, and we haven't really hardened that infrastructure. So you start to look at satellites that are orbiting overhead are suddenly able to do a lot of interesting things that they haven't really been able to do before. So you look at the Beidou satellites, the Glasnost satellites, the GPS satellites of the three major nation states. They now have ability to do espionage and data exfiltration through their satellite control systems. One of the biggest breach areas we're seeing today is being able to airborne out data and then upload to a satellite that's flying overhead. How many of you are looking for data exfiltration of command and control servers in orbit? This is the new normal we're seeing as another attack surface is expanding. So this big market I call cyber really is in all three domains of land, air, and space going forward. And as I said at the very beginning, it's almost a perfect storm. Lots of technology, lots of vulnerabilities, lots of attackers. Throw the crisis and the pandemics on top of it, you have an interesting world. So Alex, sorry for the sort of ominous thing, with all that going on, but what an incredible world we live in today with this market and with this industry. And with that, I'll flip it over to you for some questions, if that's cool.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. That was really, really insightful and very interesting presentation. So would now like to open up to questions. As mentioned before, you can input your questions in the chat or the questions tab. I will kick us off. David, you mentioned SASE, and Gartner kind of predicted that by 2024, we're going to have like a 40% adoption of SASE, up from like 1% in 2018. Do you see the current environment, the pandemic, accelerating, that trend and maybe other trends that we may not be aware of?
Yeah, Alex, I do. In fact, I like that you cited that number. In fact, I believe it was Gartner, although don't quote me on that, estimated it's a $25 billion market coming in the next few years, right? So the SASE market is real. Clearly, it's probably the single biggest inertia I actually have seen in the market, where you've seen a relatively nascent market become a multi-billion-dollar market quickly. And I mentioned the one company I boss, not that I should harp on that, but the ability to quickly replace your cloud gateways, your on-premise gateways, your Blue Coats, your McAfee gateways, your WebSense, ForcePoint gateways, with a new next generation gateway model and do it in days or minutes is amazing. So I watched this iBoss company, and there's a number of others with Cato networks and Zscalers and things that are going on there that enable you to essentially replace all that defense architecture that was on-prem with a SASE container-based model and improve the security posture dramatically while increasing the performance dramatically. I mean, that's why this is working. I watched one large Fortune 500 company replace the entire infrastructure in 8 days, over 100 web gateways in 8 days with a SASE model, and had an improved security posture and a lower attack surface than they had before. So like, you can feel the promise of these SASE engines really, expanding. And, I think that's going to be the way it is for the future. Every SaaS application, PaaS application will probably have a SASE cloud container as an access point into it, because then you can mix and match whatever your favorite security vendor in the container is. You like FireEye, put it in there. You like CrowdStrike, put it in there. You like whoever, you spin up a container behind the cloud gateway, and you can pick vanilla, chocolate, or strawberry for your security defense, and it creates a new model. So yeah, absolutely. It's probably the most interesting, biggest TAM in security that I'm seeing.
Wow, that feat of like 8 days to do anything, that's really impressive. And we know that for a long time now, the cybersecurity industry is actually missing a lot of professionals. There's not a lot of people filling the jobs, and one of the premise behind that was that AI was going to step in and kind of take over a lot of the tasks. And you also mentioned it in your presentation that machine learning is actually like at the center. Do you see anything interesting happening in that space? Maybe specifically because of the pandemic, because we moved, to working from home and so on. That's kind of triggering certain machine learning adoption or deployments that we would not have seen otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I think you really hit on something. The shortage of talent problem is still measured in the millions. And then you exacerbate that during the pandemic, where it's difficult for these security professionals to work in groups and clusters. And, human intelligence is still a very vital part of, solving these complex attacker problems. So, all leading to some of the threat landscape elevation. But to your question of AI, absolutely. I always say to every security company, if you don't have cloud, you don't have crowd, and you don't have AI, don't even come and pitch me on your security company, because it's the table stakes required for the future. And now as an investor, with $1 billion kind of fund, I keep looking for companies that are next generation, but I won't even look at one who can't cloud deploy, cloud manage, who doesn't have a crowd behind it, meaning you're able to crowdsource your customers in your learning, your ML AI learning, and you're not using next generation AI techniques to parse that information, because telemetry and visibility matters no matter what section of the market you're in. So I kind of look at that and go, everybody should be doing that, which has created, I think, the greatest shortage in one particular area of cyber: data scientists. Like, you just can't find them. I mean, every CISO out there probably will tell you is like, how do I get a hold of one of them, or get a whole team who can really help me with my SOC and learn using these tools. So, I have seen some really interesting ones growing up, but, it is really still early and nothing super mainstream that, I think is, like, wow, there's the tool. I thought Cylance early on really did a nice job. They got a little sidetracked with the BlackBerry acquisition, but they had done a really nice job with the first gen AI. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that coming. I won't name too many vendors, but it's interesting to watch for sure.
I want to switch gears a little bit and move to the kind of attackers and the cyber attacks. This year, we've seen a lot of sort of prominent or flashy cyber attacks. We've seen the Garmin ransomware attack, which kind of like plays into that. It affected aviation. It plays into your drone.
Right here. It was hard to play golf that week. I don't know. It was a real essential worker problem.
So the Garmin ransomware attack. We've seen the Twitter attack. Apart from like the COVID-19 theme and preying on that fears, are we seeing something different in the nature of the attacks these days, or is it just business as usual for the cyber criminals?
Oh, it's definitely not business as usual, right? We have one of the greatest, arms races in the history of the world happening with the vaccinations and medicine today. I mean, I don't think there's a nation out there who, it's almost like, the man on the moon, right? Or the cure for cancer, right? We're having an incredible race around the world to see who could solve this problem. And then it won't stop there. Like every crisis occurs, you have opportunity to significantly move forward with, intelligence about that area. And we're watching that with some of the vaccination vendors, the processes, teledoctoring, telemedicine, a lot of silver linings occurring here. But boy, has this created, a race in cyber to essentially gain an advantage. I mean, there's not a healthcare company in the biotech space today who hasn't seen the most egregious attacks in their lifetime. And you look at the way the scientific community works. Well, first of all, they're all working from home, and they've kind of always worked from home. They're spread all over the world. They're sharing on public cloud information, things like Slack, and they're using those tools, WhatsApp tool, WeChat tools, and it's almost too easy to go and attack them. So, not only is there a race there, one of the biggest worries that I have, quite frankly, with this new normal is information. I mean, we just cannot rely on anything. If I look at a Washington Post, New York Times article, and it gets published on their website, by the time I see it in my browser, it has been altered multiple times. And you can't rely on content integrity on the internet at all. You don't even know who's posting it. The amount of essentially, major command and control servers that have set up for disinformation campaigns is off the chart. We're bringing them down on a regular basis, but it's incredible. All you have to do is set a website up in the world, post something about a new vaccination, and then disseminate it across 10,000 social bots, and then create friends and followers across that. And you can disseminate to millions, if not tens of millions of people, false information in minutes. And so like that one problem, and of course we'll see it in the election campaigns here in the US, but every election around the world, what an interesting dislocation we have now of what the offense can do and what the defense can stop.
Thank you so much. I'd now like to open it up. Maybe Willie, we can get one question from the audience, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Dave, Alex, thank you both. Those are really insightful talks and the general discussion. So one question I think on everyone's mind, has work from home become the main threat today for companies? And I guess what solutions exist to secure homes?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different areas, Will, that we have to think about. I kind of quickly alluded to, if I'm a CISO, and I kind of am in a lot of ways, just because of my big boards that I'm on and overseeing it. But I look at now like, okay, I got 80,000 employees at home, and what do I have to do to protect the most important employees who are accessing my most important systems at home, and what do I have to give them? I think about my system administrators, my coders, my VIP level people who are accessing systems, my financial controllers and people coming in, and almost everybody knows who those people are. But what do you have to do? You have to start with that router, and how old's my router? Is your router secure? How secure is that router, really? I mean, it doesn't take much to go on the internet and find how insecure those routers actually are. And our ability to put an implant in that router, all you have to do is ask an IDF 8200 personnel, what did they do for years attacking people at home? They implant on the router. If you ask anybody from TAO and the NSA, they implant on the router. So there's good commercial defense now. So one of the things, if you're a managed security service provider like Orange, what do? You create a work from home managed services version. And what you want to do is create sensors at that router, and all you're doing is tracking anomalous behavior at the router level, dropping into your SOC. So suddenly you're like, wait, why is that router having multiple sessions coming through that router? Well, it's probably anomalous. So technologies exist now to protect the router and the home that could be extended from managed security services in a fairly easy way. And I don't see it getting deployed too much yet. That has to happen. Of course, there's a lot of technology too in the workplace products on the desktops that need to occur. People have to be thinking about that spear phishing on multiple channels, not just email at home. So a lot of things that need to happen there. But yeah, I put a lot of focus on that, Will.
Yeah, that's great. I'll ask you a really quick one, which is not a quick one, I think, but then let Alex wrap up perhaps. But I threw into the chat that this Lily Tomlin quip about no matter how cynical I become, it's never enough to keep up. And I was also reminded as you were talking about a Rahm Emanuel quote about never let a crisis go to waste. And how would do you have any general advice for companies about taking advantage of the crisis to rethink or maybe remake your cyber defenses or Is there opportunity here?
Yeah, Will, I'll keep it quick, but there's also a Mandarin word, a Chinese word that crisis means danger and opportunity, right? So you want to think about that as you're in this crisis, right? This is the greatest opportunity. If I'm a security professional now, my job has never been more important, right? And a lot of companies, depending on what you're doing, there's so many transformations occurring for you to take advantage of during this time. And I would be really looking for ways to help in that regard. And things you think about the whole B2C community and the services transformation that's occurring. Instead of me going and dining in, it's being delivered to my house. Packages. I mean, Target and Walmart had triple-digit growth last quarter. Triple-digit growth. I mean, they've never seen that in their history. And there's just so many of these transformations going on that it creates a really interesting opportunity for security professionals to innovate, to really make sure that their voice is being heard in ways that never before. So, there's new crowdsourcing techniques that you can use to get people now. There's some amazing sites that can help you with these transformations. We could spend time talking about next generation reskilling. I don't know if you've seen there's a company called Skyhive that's all about AI-based reskilling for IT and security professionals that enables crowdsourcing of reskilling and certificates that you can track. And it's really interesting, the innovation scenarios that are emerging here during the crisis. So yeah, take advantage of it if you can.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Will. That was really insightful. I'd now like to move and kind of highlight some of the key takeaways from our webinar today. As we've seen, the connectivity networks in cybersecurity play a central and crucial role in supporting the safe operations of enterprises as well as guarding the digital lives of consumers. And this role has been further amplified by the current shelter-in-place environment. Furthermore, we've seen the pandemic forcing a reconsideration of what it takes to be connected. And this in turn focuses the attention on the operators and large tech companies as the key enablers of this economic activity. And of course, lastly, but not least, cybersecurity's role is pushed to the front as a guardian of our ever-increasing digital lives. I'd now like to end by talking briefly about X-Force, which is Orange Silicon Valley's corporate co-innovation program. If you're interested in the trends of Silicon Valley, or if you're interested in partnering or investing in startups, we would really like you to be a part of the program. To find out more, you can email my colleagues, David Martin or Ellen Crown. And with that, I would like to give a special thank you to our guest speaker, Mr. David DeWalt, for sharing his experiences and insights with us all. And thank you to all of you who joined our live session today. We look forward to connecting with you in the future. All our best to you as you navigate the next normal. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.